Strangers into Citizens, which is why we're here. And I want to tell you a little bit about the campaign and then what we're planning on the 3rd of May. But please ask whatever you like. There is in this newspaper, which has just come out, Migrant Voice. Have you all got a copy of that? Yeah. There are some copies here. Just inside, I've written an article there which actually has a summary of the campaign and its objectives. So, well worth reading. The campaign is a campaign by London Citizens and Citizens UK, which is the country's largest community organising operation. You may have heard recently that when the Conservatives announced their big society agenda, you probably didn't realise, but they referred to us as the leading trainers in community organising. Community organising, very, very simply and basically put, is a methodology by which civil society organisations come together into an alliance to promote the interests of civil society and persuade those people in power, whether they're in politics or in business, to do more of what we want them to do. So it's a means of influencing the political, both the state and the market. And London Citizens is the largest community organising alliance in the country. We have 150 organisations in London. They are mostly churches, a very large number from Catholic and Anglican churches, but also a whole variety of Christian churches. We have mosques, we have schools, we have trade union branches, and we have schools. And they are part of a power alliance which gets together and in assemblies decides on what we want to change. Now, we have a number of different campaigns. The most famous one we're famous for is called the London Living Wage, which again has become part of the political discourse. You'll have seen in the Labour manifesto, they're committed to the living wage, which was our idea. We persuaded them of that. And we have other campaigns on the asylum issue, on housing, affordable housing through community land trust, a whole variety of issues. But there's one issue which has always been very, very dear to our alliance, and that is the plight of the more than 700,000 undocumented or irregular migrants who live in the UK, have put down roots in our society, whose children go to our schools, most of them work, most of them pay taxes, yet they are not recognised by the law. They are a kind of shadow population. Now, the existence of this population has always been known to churches, mosques, community organisations like Edmonds, because they know that they're there. But it's been an issue, their plight or their situation has been, until we first raised it in 2006, was something that was never talked about politically. It was inconvenient for the government to admit that there was a very large number of people who were, if you like, not supposed to be here, and yet who hadn't been forcibly removed. As you know, government policy is officially that everybody who shouldn't be here should go home. The reality is that there are only about 20 or 30,000 people each year who are forcibly removed from the UK. It's a logistical, complicated and expensive exercise. And the British borders were very porous back in the early part of the 21st century, 2001, 2002. There began to be a very large build-up of irregular migrants, some who had come through the asylum system and had their claims refused, others who came on visas perfectly legally but then fell into illegality as a result of the rules changing, or they stayed on. I mean, very typical story would be somebody who came here to study, then began working quite legally, then carried on working, then their right to work finished, but they carried on working, and they may have got married. Anyway, the point is they put down roots in Britain. Now, we've always argued in this campaign from a very realistic standpoint, which is to say, you can argue as much as you like about whether these people should be here or shouldn't be here. Have that argument by all means. The fact is, they are here, and they cannot be, most of them, removed. It's just a fact. The Home Office will also admit this. So therefore, the choice becomes, do you bring this population out of the shadows into the light? Do you bring them, as it were, into the legal society and economy so that they pay taxes, so that they can report crimes, so that they can vote? In other words, do you make them in some form citizens? Or do you, as government policy currently effectively encourages, allow this population to exist underneath the radar, a large shadow population which many of whom do not pay taxes, cannot report crimes to the police, cannot avail themselves of vital health services and so on. Is that good for them? No. Is it good for Britain? We say no. So the alternative to this is some form of regularisation strategy. Without getting into the complexities of the arguments, there are various models of regularisation or pathway into citizenship. You know that in America there are 11 million undocumented migrants, and President Obama is in favour of what they call a pathway into citizenship, and there they're talking about people having to pay fines as part of the process of becoming regularised. In Spain in 2005 they did a mass regularisation of 700,000 people, and there they used the criterion fundamentally of employment. If you could demonstrate that you've got a job, then you can stay. We have a particular we advocate a particular form of regularisation based on length of residence, so that we argue that effectively the state's right to erode, the state's right to deport, erodes over time, and that somebody who is here for many years, by putting down roots, they acquire rights. We think this is a good moral principle. It's also a principle recognised in law. So we say, if you have been here for more than 5 years, then you should be able to work your way into legality through a kind of work scheme in which you demonstrate your ability to contribute. We also suggest other criteria such as an English language test, no criminal record. Frankly, it's not us who are going to decide to do it. It'll be up to the government to decide how. But some form of regularisation based on conditions and based on residence requirement is what we advocate. We started to talk about this in 2006 following the first Mass for Migrants at Westminster Cathedral, led by the then Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster, who first made the call by a faith leader for some form of regularisation. And after May 2006, we then began this campaign, which is called Strangers into Citizens. And we began to argue, and of course we were told at the beginning, this is completely impossible. How dare you suggest this? It'll never work, which, by the way, is what they told us about the living wage campaign. The living wage is now endorsed by London's mayor, and so is Strangers into Citizens. So we have persuaded the mayor, Boris Johnson. We have also persuaded the Liberal Democrats, although their residence requirement is longer than ours. But it's very interesting that the Liberal Democrats, we persuaded them on this, and nobody particularly noticed. But now that the Liberal Democrats are doing very well, and suddenly people are talking about a Liberal Democrat possibly influencing the political agenda, suddenly this policy of theirs is under scrutiny. So we persuaded the Liberal Democrats, we persuaded London's mayor, and we have had lots and lots of discussions with the government, which have had some results, which I'll come back to. But what have we done? We've brought together the major civil society organisations on this issue, and twice, once in 2007 and again last year in 2009, brought together the largest ever public display of solidarity and support for migrants. In the first rally we had in 2007, we had about 8,000 or 9,000 in Trafalgar Square. Last year, some of you were there, we had close to 20,000 in Trafalgar Square. And we have succeeded, I suppose, in transforming the political debate about the issue. At least now, this is something which is discussed. It is seen as something that needs to be addressed, and that's really the result of our campaign. So, what have we actually achieved in terms of regularising? Well, neither the government nor the Conservative Party are in favour, although we have, I think, won the argument. We haven't yet won the politics. They are very scared to do this. But under the radar, the Labour government has been quietly regularising the situation of many refused asylum seekers who have been here for many years, who have received letters giving them indefinite leave to remain on the basis, and I'm quoting here from the letters, of their long association with the UK. Now that's precisely our argument, and therefore we know privately that we have influenced this, and privately we have helped this to bring this about, but we cannot say, obviously we cannot prove it, and if you go to the government and ask them, they'll probably say, oh, no, we are treating each of these on a case-by-case basis. But we have made a difference, and we continue to be very passionate about this issue until the plight of this population is addressed, we want to carry on. So that's about the campaign.
We have gone over the campaign overview, but I'm going to hand over to Austen now, who will give you more detailed information about what's going to happen on May the 3rd.
Thank you. So you've heard some very powerful testimonies from the heart of the Chinese community in London, and the situation is really very straightforward. The Chinese catering industry across the UK is in crisis. There is demand for labour. The labour is not available. The government says all the low-skilled labour needs of all the industries in Britain can be met by Eastern Europe, but Poles and Lithuanians do not want to work in Chinese restaurants, and therefore that lack of labour exists. The Strangers into Citizens rally at midday on the 3rd of May is intended to draw attention to this crisis and to say something must be done by whoever forms the next government. It's very clear, I think you won't be surprised to know that we think there's a solution to that crisis, and it's a very obvious one. It lies in the very large pool of irregular Chinese migrants who have been in the UK for many years, who have put down roots and are part of British society. They won't be deported, and at the moment many of them are condemned to the kind of furtive shadow existence which, as Edmund and the others were saying, has a very tremendous psychological impact. A wasted life is manifest, is to be seen in gambling, the child who cannot go abroad with his fellow school children. This kind of human waste is a consequence of their irregular status. So here we have two problems that can be solved, if you like, very immediately and very obviously and very quickly by some form of selective regularisation of long-term Chinese irregular migrants. The exact details of that obviously need to be worked out. What we're asking for on the 3rd of May, and by the way, we means the institutions of London citizens, but specifically the community institutions of Westminster Borough, which Chinatown is in, and that includes churches, and includes actually also organisations such as Edmonds Chinese Information Advisory Centre, and we have also a Chinese Gambling Rehabilitation Centre in membership. There are various organisations which are coming together on the 3rd of May to say we would like the next government to create a working party which would involve all the experts and gentlemen who are here today on this panel, as well as, of course, London citizens, to say, let's talk about this. Let's see if we can find a solution, and let's see if we can come up with a pathway into citizenship for these irregular migrants, and at the same time solve the problems of the catering industry. So, two problems, one solution. We think it's straightforward. By the way, I ought to just say, because this hasn't yet arisen, that the main political objection to regularisation, which is raised by the government whenever you ask it, they say any form of regularisation acts as a green light to further illegal immigration. In other words, you introduce a regularisation and you send a message to irregular migrants across the world that they can come here, and if they hang around long enough, they'll become regular. The evidence for this is thin and in fact points the other way. As long as there are strict residence requirements, and you know much better than I do, and the people at this table know better than I do, that people do not cross the world in search of a future possible regularisation in 5 or 10 years' time. Their needs and their priorities and their motivations are much more short-term and immediate than that. But if you don't believe me, look at Spain in 2005, which is the largest scale regularisation programme in Europe, and in fact illegal immigration went down in the 2 or 3 years subsequent to that regularisation. It did not go up. However, regularisation cannot of itself solve illegal immigration. It cannot. But we say it is part of the solution. And some of you may be shocked by this, but we have always accepted in the campaign that there is a border tightening going to happen, and it is happening, has been happening for the last few years, and all the main parties, including the Liberal Democrats, are agreed that borders should be tightened. So we don't argue with that. What we say is it's a contradiction to tighten borders, and at the same time to allow a very large irregular population in Britain. Because in fact what happens is you'll only encourage people trafficking and an underground economy. So regularisation is a way of shrinking the underground economy and actually assisting, if you like, the border tightening policies, while at the same time being a practical and humane answer to the plight of irregularity. But specifically on this 3rd of May Chinatown action, that is what we're doing. Those are our objectives. But how we're going to do it is in the timetable here, but I think I'll leave Nikki to talk about.